This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under 18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 563 for October 7th, 2018. Coming up on today's show, queer poly diverse fiction. That's Kevin Patterson and Alana Phelan's newest book. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Minx. And we just have one announcement before we get into our fantastic chat with Kevin Patterson and his co-author, Alana Phelan, about their new fiction book on polyamory. Yes, that's right. We really need more polyfiction. And they have normalized queerness and polyamory and diversity, and I'm so excited about this book. But before we get to that, a quick announcement. Poly Big Fun. You guys may have heard about this on the show before. It's an annual workshop and retreat for people who identify as poly. And this year, they're doing something different. They're doing a virtual Poly Big Fun. It's November 10th, 2018. And there will be venues hosted in 5 different cities: Austin, Houston, Philadelphia, Portland, and San Antonio. Those will provide physical locations where poly folks can meet for fellowship and communities, while watching seminars presented by local experts, as well as internationally acclaimed authors and activists Franklin Vo and Jorith Innkeeper. Franklin will be presenting My Abuser is Woke, Recognizing Abuse When an Abuser is Skilled in the Language of Social Justice, and Jorith will be presenting Breaking Up in the Poly Community. There are also plans to have presentations on the wilder side of poly, how to cope with jealousy, compartmentalization, legal considerations of co-housing, and a presentation about online dating. And some other talks. It's just $10 in advance and $15 at the door. The venues in the different cities will vary on hours and what they're offering, so you can visit polybigfun.org to register and find out more. And then Poly Big Fun will return to the newly renovated barracks at Bastrop State Park on the weekend of April 12th through the 14th. Any more questions? polybigfun.org. I am so excited to have with me back in the studio, Kevin Patterson. Welcome back, Kevin.
Hey, thanks, Minx. Thanks for having me on.
And his new co-author, Alana Phelan. Welcome.
Hi, Minx.
Kevin, it's so great to have you back. And Alana, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really excited because there's a really good, exciting reason that you guys are here. And that's because, Kevin, you tell me you got a new book out and it's fiction. Is that true?
Yes, it is. I was writing Love's Not Colorblind, Race and Representation in Polyamorous and Other Alternative Communities, and I needed sort of a mental break, and I had an idea in my head, and I ended up writing a longer book, like the first draft for a longer book that I never expected anyone would actually read. And then once Love's Not Colorblind was out to market and people were enjoying it and it was having its impact, I mean, I feel like it's still having its impact, I got together with Alana and we reworked the whole thing. We reworked the whole thing from top to bottom. Like what I wrote as a first draft, the analogy I always use is that if you bang a bunch of action figures together, you can have a fun time, but you're not really going to tell a good story. And Alana knows good stories. She's a librarian. She reads hundreds of books a year. She knows what makes a quality narrative. And we sat down together and redid the whole thing.
Okay, let's back this up a little bit. So this is a fiction book. Yes. Fictional story in a superhero universe where there's like queer and poly and people of color, and it's all like totally normal and natural and cool.
Yeah. And I mean, we didn't want to make it so normalized that you never discuss anybody's identities, but we wanted to make it so that it was actually a world that pushes back against sort of the oppression that makes those things so not normalized in our own society. I mean, it's very close to our own world, except that we push back and we have superheroes that push back against marginalization.
And what is it called?
This one is called For Hire Operator, and it's a universe that we're calling For Hire, and the next one might be something else, but it's all in the For Hire universe, and this one is Operator.
So there's going to be more of these books. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh yeah. We've got at least 4 ideas in our heads, and we're always talking about what we're going to do for the next 2 or 3. We never talk about one. We always talk about 2 or 3 and try to figure out how we're going to write them all at the same time.
Now, this is usually the point where I would ask, so why did you decide to write this book? Why did you decide we needed this book? But you've already said that you wrote it as a brain break from Love's Not Colorblind. But I'm still going to ask, actually, I'm not going to ask. I'm just going to say, we need more polyfiction.
When Alana and I were doing a lot of market research for this, we looked into like the superhero genre, and what we found was a lot of books calling themselves polyamory or polyamorous, and they were not almost all, they were all harem fantasy books, and the covers on all of them were like big brawny white dudes and either white or alien looking superhero women with like big breasts, and it was all like this junior high fantasy stuff. And when you'd read the descriptions of the books and when you'd read the descriptions of the authors, like their bios, it all seemed like this is what I would have written in 15 years old, like, to sort of get over puberty. This was like speaking down to an audience. So it felt like low hanging fruit of books. And I was really upset because they were calling themselves polyamorous. And like, I mean, I've been polyamorous for 16 years. I don't know anybody in any harems. Do you?
Not off the top of my head, but I'm sure the second we say that, somebody's going to write in and say, Minx, I told you I was in a harem. I'm not being represented.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just not that common, right?
No. And it felt like they were speaking down to their audience, and that's not something we wanted to do.
So who should read this? I mean, I'm not really that much of a geek. I know, don't laugh. But I never read comic books really, unless they were in French. And the superhero genre, I'm like, I can kind of take it or leave it. So who is this for? Is this for people who already read superhero books? Is it for anybody who's poly?
So I think really what this book does is it mixes a couple of genres. So it's got a science fiction basis. It's got a fantastic element. So you've got a little bit of fantasy in there. And then on top of that, Kev actually created this amazing sort of thriller book. And then you have in it the 2 main characters who are going through a part of their relationship in a way that they never have before. So you almost have a romantic element as well. And that's why I think this book is going to be something that you can hand to most people and they'll enjoy it because they'll get something out of it.
And also, something we try to do a lot of is there's this love triangle, love V that we see in fiction, like in every random fiction all the time. And yeah, and it's always, person A is in love with person B and C and they don't know what to do with themselves. And they always find some weird way to write it out where one of them dies or one of them ends up being evil or just there's always like, there's no natural progression there. They find a way to X out one of the candidates and person A chooses their one true love. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted our characters, we didn't want to force polyamory. We wanted characters who were polyamorous to make decisions that polyamorous people would make. Where if there's a love triangle, A, we wanted it to be an actual triangle and not a V. And B, we didn't want the conflict to be the existence of the love triangle. We wanted it to be sort of the personal dynamics of the people involved. It's not just because I like 2 people, that's the conflict. In our book, if there's a conflict, it's a conflict because the people involved, are having real personal conflicts and they have to sort them out in real ways without us, randomly making someone evil or randomly killing Josh Hartnett so that Kate Beckinsale and Ben Affleck could run off into the sunset together in Pearl Harbor, or making Luke and Leia brother and sister so like Leia doesn't have to choose between Luke and Han, that kind of stuff.
Can you introduce us to some of your characters?
The main character, well, let me backtrack there. The book is called For Hire Operator, and an operator is someone who is sort of like, it's a superhero world, and superheroes are sort of the rock stars. They are the people with the social media cred, with the big names, with the popularity, with the endorsement deals. But operators are more of a dirty work, hero for hire sort of superhuman. And our main character is an operator. So she sets her own hours. She can be hired to do assassinations, or she can be hired to kidnap. She could be hired to do some hacking, to do intimidation, the kind of things that a superhero shouldn't be seen doing. She sells her services as doing. And the conflict there with our main character, Sana, is that her girlfriend, Marcella, is the most famous operator in the country, or the most famous superhero in the country. And because they're both on such different ends of the scale, one person doing sort of in the shadows dirty work and one person with a huge public image, that ends up being the conflict between the two of them. They're trying to make their relationship work when they're just doing two completely different things with their abilities.
You had me at the main character as a woman.
Yeah, and something we really wanted to do is like in all of those harem fantasy books that we saw, the authors were all men, presumably white men, presumably cisgender heterosexual white men who were writing these harem fantasies. We wanted to write queer polyamorous superhero books centering people of color, written by queer polyamorous people of color. Or, I'm a person of color. Alana and I are both polyamorous. She identifies as queer. I identify as, maybe, I don't know. So we want to lend that authenticity to our characters.
Alana, I'm curious, where do you come into the picture? I mean, Kevin told us a little bit about how you helped him with the book, but when did you come in? Why? How?
Kev and I have known each other for quite a while through our local polyamory community, and we developed a friendship which turned into a very special metamorphship. And so when he finished his book, he wanted me to take a look at it. And the first thing that I did was I read maybe like 2 or 3 pages, and I said to him, Kev, I can't finish this. I don't feel like you've already put me off this book because I don't feel like your main character is looking at this woman the way that a woman would look at a woman. I don't think she's making an accurate, authentic assessment. And so I said, if you could rewrite this, let me tell you from my perspective how I feel that women look at each other and judge each other. And if you want to rewrite it or whatever, I would love to see it when it's done. I'm not really a first draft kind of a person. And I think I hurt his feelings a little, but he did it. I mean, he sort of went back into the narrative and looked at what was going on there, and he decided eventually that he wanted somebody to come in and be that authentic voice for the characters, which I loved doing. It has been one of the most fun experiences of my life because I've always written here and there and everywhere, but to have somebody like Kev who's so driven, if he starts a project, he's going to finish it. Whereas if I sit down and write something, I'll write until like the next thing comes along. To be able to go over his work and say like, this is great, but also let's add this in. He never got his ego never got in the way of the writing process. And I really appreciate his dedication to that. Like at a certain point, like I was really supposed to just edit the book. But then at one point he was like, yeah, you should write that. Write that part. That part, that idea you just came up with, that's a great idea. Why don't you write that? And that's how I got involved.
That's amazing. And props to Kevin too, because we can, writers can have a little bit of ownership over their work and it is easy to get your ego bruised. So good for you.
Yeah, I'm always telling people like the work I do is more important than my ego, and like the work other people do is more important than my ego. So which is why I'm always really freely giving of myself in terms of like helping people's other projects if I can. Like if I can do it within like my level of bandwidth, if I can promote something you're doing, even if like you and I don't get along, if you've got a new project, I want to promote that because your work is more important than my ego. My work is more important than my ego. I just want to put out good content into the world and hopefully create like a culture shift. Just put out good content.
Hey, Alana, we kind of breezed over your introduction. What is your background?
So I have a degree in English and literature. I'm also a librarian by profession. A lot of what I do is sort of I look at people's work and I help them get it to the best of where it is. I also work in the local community. For a couple of years, I was a liaison between different groups, making sure that everybody was on the same page, that groups could host events together, that they weren't necessarily bumping up against each other and like, so like you could tell one group, hey, why don't you throw this kind of event because there's a lack there. So that's the sort of thing that I generally do. And what I brought to this book. I do a lot of stuff in my life. I try to do a lot of things in my life. I try to keep busy all the time. But in terms of this project, that's what I was bringing to it. I was bringing an editor's eye and then ended up bringing a writer's pen.
A lovely analogy if I ever heard one. We know this is set in a superhero type universe, but I've always been impressed when people can do this exhaustive world building where you've really thought about every single aspect of the world and the culture. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. This is one of the things I love that Kevin brought to this. So the world of For Hire is, as he says, it's like our own. But this concept of superheroes being in the forefront means that there were a lot of fights fought earlier in the timeline than you would see in our real world. So the first major superhero was black. And so the civil rights movement was sort of going along with this superhero movement as well. And since those two groups were involved in the civil rights movement, it left more room for other groups to step in and become prominent. So with the book, with the writing especially, I'm constantly asking Kevin about his perception of the world, because when I usually write, I'm interacting with the world right now. Whether I'm writing fantasy or science fiction or something realistic, I'm always interacting with sexism and racism and classism. And I have to turn to Kevin and I have to be like, hey, in this world, where are they on this timeline? And so I'd like to think that where it is about maybe 20 to 30 years ahead tops. So you can have polyamorous relationships, and people are not necessarily going to bat an eye at that, because there have been polyamorous people who were in the news, who were in the public eye, and they have been more varied than what we have seen in the past, like, say, 10, 15 years in terms of media representation.
And to piggyback off of that, I apologize that I'm going to bring up like our current terrible news cycle, but I always say that like when it comes to things like oppression, it's if you're going to fight it, if you're going to beat it, the people with the ability to create change have to care. So like if you're looking at say this what happened this week with the Supreme Court.
So for those of you who are listening to this out of sequence or who just discovered this, that was the nomination and confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
Yes. And you had tons of women, tons of abuse survivors, trauma survivors who were saying like, this is, this is what this does to me. This is how it affects my life. This is how it affects, sort of like my perception of the world around me. And mostly men, were just sort of dismissive of that and confirmed a guy who is accused multiple times of sexual abuse. If there was going to be a change, there were going to have to be men with the ability to create change saying, this is a problem. We're going to use our power. We're going to use our platform to show people that this isn't okay. And we're going to work against this. Unfortunately, in this case, we didn't have that. In the world of For Hire, it's not just a matter of identity privilege. It's also a matter of legitimate superpowers. So the people with the power to create change are superhumans, literal superhumans. So if this first superhero is a black guy and he sees racism in his local community and he says, I'm going to use this power that I have to fight racism. Like, if you're going to use my powers to create a safer environment, also use your ability as the mayor of whatever city to create a safer environment by way of working against systemic oppression. And when that becomes a thing, that becomes sort of the standard for all superheroes, where if you got this big platform and endorsements and social media and people love you, also make sure you're using that ability, your platform, your power to fight other brands of oppression, where, like, that's not the focus of For Hire Operator. It's just how the world works in which this story takes place, where there is a superhero who's known for for normalizing larger bodies. There is a superhero who's known for working through housing reform. That's not the main bulk of their story, but that's what their legacy is going to be. It has nothing to do with them punching supervillains in the head. That's what the story's for. But they live in a world where they're valued for more than just that.
I love the fact that you made civil rights leaders actual superheroes. How fucking cool is that? That's amazing.
Yeah. And we name the book For Hire because that's what the characters are. Like, the superheroes are public servants. They go to work every day, they get a paycheck, they do a job. And operators, they work the other way around, where they get paychecks, they do a job, but they're doing more of a off the books, out of the public eye sort of job. So everybody, if you're a superhero, you're for hire, but what are you using your abilities for? And what are you using your platform and your legacy for?
I can't wait to read this book. Can you tell us a little bit? I know we're almost at the end of our time together. I can't believe it. Can you tell us a little bit more about this universe and this world?
Well, this particular story again is sort of a conflict between two women who have been they've been coupled since high school, and they've just sort of, their paths sort of diverged in terms of how they wanted to use their powers, and so they have to figure out what their relationship is going to look like going forward as they sort of hit the peak of, like, the breaking point between their two diverged paths. And one of them has to sort of stay in the public eye and be the big superhero that everybody knows, with the endorsement deals and the licensed merchandise and the video games and the energy drink. And the other one has to create her own brand of change, beat her own brand of big name villains, while also staying completely in the shadows and working out a lot of conflict from their shared past.
Okay, so it's a world that still has energy drinks. That's good to know.
One of the things I really love about this is that you can, if you want to, sort of boil down the two main characters, and you can say that really it's about an extrovert dating an introvert, and it's about an introvert dating an extrovert. And it really does boil it down quite a bit. But the concept of what these people are doing is absolutely reflective of their personalities. And also their polyamory is reflective of their personalities. I am very excited because this world has the option of polyamory as a possibility for a standard, right? It's not, you don't have a default of monogamy necessarily. There are enough polyamorous and enough monogamous people in the world that you can look at both and say, hey, I can make a choice for myself. And so what I'm really excited for going into the future is to present different types of polyamory, because this couple has a very specific type, and it doesn't get into it, but there's another character who is very briefly mentioned who has a different type. And then later in the other books, you're going to see people in all sorts of different configurations.
Yeah, and like our main character Sana, who the book follows almost exclusively, like, her polyamory is more situational, conditional polyamory, where she's got this one main relationship, and if other opportunities appear, if other chances to love or other chances to love or date or just to like hook up with occur, that's where she wants to be, you know, while also being an introvert. Whereas our main character, Marcella, her polyamory is a lot like mine. Like, she dates a lot, she meets a lot of people that she likes and loves and hooks up with, and, you know, she's sort of airy-fairy. She still comes home to the same person and builds a life with this same one person, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't treat the other people in her life just as seriously, give them just as much of herself as she can. So I like the idea of showing off different brands of polyamory in the same book, while also not letting it be a harem fantasy, because that's not at all what we wanted to do.
And I appreciate that. I think we're pretty close to the end of our time together. Last question, when is the book coming out? Okay, last two questions. When is the book coming out, and where can they buy it?
All right. Well, the book is coming out October 12th, and it'll be available. It'll be available on Amazon. It should be available as an ebook. It should be and also as a paperback. And also, we are going to be doing a release party on October 24th. Wednesday, October 24th at 6 p.m. in Philadelphia at the historic Amalgam Comics and Coffee House. We're really excited to be able to book a space that fantastic to release, and we're going to be having a dialogue there about representation in media of polyamory and just sort of like identity politics and representation in media. Please show up. We've got a DJ. We're really excited. There's going to be a little after party at a walking distance bar, Amalgam Comics.
We'll provide a link to that in the show notes for those of you who are in the area or who have the means to get to the area.
Yes.
Kevin and Alana, this is so exciting. It really is. Alana, tell us where we can find you online.
So you can find me as the Polyamorous Librarian. I have a website which has all my services on it. I do event planning. I do support coaching. I also write an advice column on there too. I have a Facebook page and a Patreon under those names as well.
And Kevin, where can people find you?
As always, I'm readily available. I'm Poly Role Models at everything. I'm like facebook.com/Poly Role Models. I'm Poly Role Models on Tumblr and Twitter and Instagram. And I'm sure there's some Patreon. I'm Poly Role Models. And for hire, the best place to find all of our information is on Facebook. We're facebook.com/ForHireMag, and we're also For Hire Mag on Twitter as well.
Kevin, Alana, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for writing this book.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to get this out there.
Thank you.
And thanks to Miryam for becoming our newest Polyweekly Playmate. Thank you. And thanks to Kevin and Alana for joining us. Thank you to our newest Polyweekly Playmate and all of our Polyweekly Playmates that subscribe and help keep the show going day in and day out. We're a free resource. We help hundreds of thousands of people navigate their introduction to and continued success with polyamory. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, call 802-505-POLY. Email polyweekly@gmail.com if you'd like to book us to speak at your next event, or if you have a book that you would like us to review, or pretty much anything else that requires more than a quick email, you want to send that to lustyguy@polyweekly.com. And with that, thanks for listening, and remember, it's not all about the sex.